So the funny thing is, even after all that prep work and trying so hard to not make a mistake, me being tired got the best of me and I still screwed up. You can see that the grass is missing. The XGen was not cached properly for batch render, so we have no grass. But, that's not a big deal. I can still continue to work and get everything set up. So you can see that massive list of renders, and now I'm going in and starting to get all this stuff organized. This is definitely a big first step for any multi-pass compositing, going in and just really getting all of your passes sorted and working and, getting in there and making sure everything looks okay. And, going in right there, that was a whole bunch of unpremultiplies. Connecting in the beauty pass and then re-premultiplying so that I can premultiply against a fresh alpha. And then it goes over top of the rest of the scene, goes through the LUT, and it's seemingly working pretty good. And, now with all of these light selects broken out, you can see there's a whole lot of dialing going on and little tweaks. So that, I can go in and really just start getting the whole scene into a little bit better spot creatively and, get it closer to what I'm imagining in my head. One of the main things I've always wanted in this scene was to be able to crank the lights around the candles a little brighter. It kind of lent itself nicely to the stylized feel that I was going for. And also, I always felt like that sunlight hitting the side of the main temple was a little too dim. And when I turned it up in the Maya file, I felt like it was casting a really nasty hue across the whole scene that I didn't like. So I made the conscious decision to go in and change that stuff during comp. And, a lot of this is just really going light by light. And, you can see here I'm just adding grade nodes. I'm just going in and, placing all of these different lights to the intensity that I want. And then, here I've grabbed my RGB mats and I'm able to go in now with the RGB mats and start going in and dialing the piece on a little bit finer level. So I think I went in and actually made the sun intensity only affect the main temple. And I went in and I did some lighting on the bridge, isolated that by itself. And, the whole time I'm working in the comp like this, I have my 2-pipe on my viewer always set to the very bottom. So no matter what I'm doing, just with the keyboard shortcut of 1 and 2, I can go in and just flip back and forth between the top where I'm working and the bottom where I'm going to be working next. So now I've brought in my utility passes as well, and I remembered that I did want to get the camera exported. So I created a limbic of the camera and brought that in as well. And, the main thing I wanted to get going with this was the clouds around the base of the cliffs. Another issue I had always felt with this image the whole time was that I was missing something around that area, and it was hard to tell that there was a gap there. So you can see there's the position to points pass, and I'm just really trying to get the scene set up so that I can really easily tell where that geometry is. So that position to points pass is a really nice way to do that using the world space. And now I've gone in and brought in a bunch of clouds, and I can put these clouds on cards and get them placed in and around the position to points pass so that I can nicely place them against those particles, and it'll look something like this. It's a pretty amazing tool, and I've actually gone in and multiplied the depth pass against the clouds now as well so that the foreground holds them out. And now the next step is really just going to be about getting their color set up. So I've gone in and sampled the black and white points off of the clouds in the background, and I'm going in with the lift and gain and really just getting in there so I can get that same exact color of blue going through the clouds. And so, then I can dial that forward and backwards and all of that and get the clouds to a place I like them. Because there's so little detail in the background in that color, I actually ended up using that pretty raw color that you're looking at there, and then I took a contrasted version of the cloud and added it back on top, just purely for the highlights to kind of pull some more shape out of them. And there you can see the clouds looking pretty good. So now I'm just grabbing some RGB mats and working with the light select some more. Now that I've got the clouds in there. And, you know, it's really kind of, I kind of bounce all over the whole comp while I'm working. It may not be the most efficient way, but, you know, it's kind of nice to just knock out major piece at a time. You know, I had always been missing those clouds, so I can get them in there. And then I can go in and get the rest of them in as I have time for it. So a little bit of chromatic aberration coming up here. And now getting a little bit of lens distortion. And I can take this and start moving forward to the get the grass in there. So as I was moving forward, you know, I really felt like I wanted some additional plant assets in here. And, you know, this is really one of those things that's like getting in there and really fine-tuning. So you can see I have a bunch of groups there, tall plants, grasses, and ground cover. And I'm going in and I'm using a script called SP Paint 3D, which is free on Creative Crash. And it's actually really great. You can load in a ground plane surface, and then you can use this tool to instance your groups around on the actual ground plane. And where it's different from something like XGen that I used for the grass is that you can really get in, you can see, and just really finely, you know, actually hand paint the placement. You're not going in and just scattering something. You're really getting in there and just kind of painting these around exactly where you want. And it's all using regular Maya instances, so your scene won't really balloon in size. And you can really just get in there and, you know, place the plants exactly how you want them. Or you can really use it for anything. In this case, I'm using it for plants. You can use it for rocks. Any type of thing where you'd really just want to have a lot of control over how an object is getting scattered around. We've used it for debris, car parts that are scattered across the street, lots of rocks. It always seems to be set dressing kind of stuff. But, you know, you can then have a random rotation, a random scale, and then you can go in and just have them separated out into their groups. And so I wanted to do this before I did another batch render, and I did that alongside of a couple other changes, and then it was back into Nuke for some final comp stuff. So we've actually got our final batch render. I've already connected it. The grass is all working. The new plants are in there. And now I wanted to work on the actual background of the image. So these are actually some photographs I took in Norway, and there are some kind of snowy mountains. And this was very challenging because you know, if you've ever been up in the mountains, there's always a snow line. And there's an area where the snow has come down to, and then below that it's raining, it's kind of wet. You know, so I want to be in this scene. The idea is that the temple is right around where the snow has stopped, and so it's a little bit wet, a little bit damp. But up in the mountains that are surrounding the temple, there's snow on them. So I was lucky enough to have these photographs already, and they actually even kind of match the time of day. They were all shot at kind of a dusk period. So I'm going in, and this whole process was a lot of, you know, again, color matching, trying to find that really nice, perfect position of the mountains and the clouds, and really just combining them however I needed to so that I could get in there and mix and match until I was happy with it. So that may end up being one photograph on one side and a different half of a photograph on another. The process you're actually watching is fairly exploratory, and, you know, it was very much getting in and just trying to find the best fit for that image. And, you know, there's really no easy way to do it. You just have to kind of get in and create a bunch of pictures or create a bunch of different background options. And I think I went through 3 or 4 variations before I really found what I was looking for. And in this case, I'm really utilizing Nuke's 3D setup so that I can place these images back there and I can mix and match stuff very easily. You can see now I've got one photograph on the left, one on the right, and I can really just bounce back and forth until I'm happy and until I get to a spot where I feel like it really both works with the composition and works with the camera angle and the coloring and the height and everything. So in the end, it ended up taking quite a while, so I'm actually going to edit out a lot of it because it's just me kind of translating these cards around in Nuke. But in the end, it looks a little bit like this. There we go. And, I was a little unsure about that hole up in the sky. In this image, the sun actually ended up directly behind the temple, and I felt you could feel that in the clouds. And so what I actually ended up doing was going in and rotoing out some of the other clouds and positioning them so that they were up in that hole, so the whole thing felt a bit more overcast and cold. I didn't really want very much of that bright sky poking through. And these are all still, at this stage, and it's a lot of work in progress, and you're constantly revising these things and going back and changing them. And so I actually, I still may even go back and record some changes before I'm even done with it because I decide I want to change something else. So, I definitely advise when you're doing this kind of stuff and it's your own designs that you're working with and you have full control over it, that you really do take a step back and talk to your friends, your peers, coworkers, whoever it may be, and get other opinions about it, because it really helps to go in and get a fresh pair of eyes on it. So it's not just you looking at the same thing. So you can see the clouds, and I finally found some clouds that were working pretty nicely, and you can see they're kind of lit from the correct side. And so that angle of that cloud matches the side of the building. And that was really the goal, is that I wanted to find some clouds that were kind of side lit and that had some of that reddish orange hue on them, which I found right there. And it ended up working really nicely. So that's where the clouds ended up. I modified the distortion a little bit, and then one of the last things I felt like I was really missing in this was a bit more of a vignette. And so the vignette got created by some just radials. And the radials, I just created them and blurred them out a little bit and graded them around and then blurred them some more until I really found the gradient in that vignette that I was happy with. And then what I did is I mapped that black and white gradient of the vignette into a grade node. I gammaed down the image in the corners so that if there was any highlights through the vignette, they would still poke through. And that's essentially it. So we're getting to a nearly final place with this guy. So been feeling pretty good about this, and I took a couple days and sat on it a little bit. I shared it with some of my coworkers and friends, and again, just getting some feedback from everybody, some criticism, which is definitely an important part of the process. And I really felt like the composition of the way the bridge connects to the rocks and leads up to the temple has always bugged me. And it always felt like the pillars on the other side of the bridge were in a different scale than the pillars at the base of the tower. And that's really because they're actually, they're in front of, and there's a little pathway of rocks in between. But because that's directly level with the camera, you really don't feel that. And so you basically see a really big pillar next to a really small pillar that's technically far away, but in the same line of sight. So it's kind of off-putting. So I decided the best thing to do was to actually, one, force a little bit of perspective. So right here, I'm actually going in and scaling down the pillars on the other side a little bit. So I was able to, utilize a little bit of a 3D trick and take advantage of the fact that this is a still image. And I'm also going in, I'm actually widening the bridge. Um, Widening the bridge really felt like it tied into the stairway that was already there and helped give a little bit more of a grand appearance to everything. And so, going in and this asset, I did have to go in and figure out exactly how to move all the pieces, which wasn't exactly easy. So you can see a lot of this is just going in and figuring out how to get the pieces in the right spot, making sure everything is still grouped together. And then it's a lot of going in and refiguring out the rocks and moving things around. After that, I wanted to go in and add a little bit more detailed door. And so I went in and actually found a nice photograph of a kind of ornate door from the Forbidden City in China. And I got that laid in as well. After the door shader was created, I needed to go in and I wanted to make sure that I had some of that texture reflecting some gold. And so because this was pretty far away, you'll notice I didn't even really model any of that. It's just literally a polygon plane with an image of a door and just remapping some of the textures on that door to go in and get some nice specular off of it. I didn't want to overdo it. It's just got a bit of a bump map and then it gets mapped in on the polygon plane. After that, goes in and just kind of going through and sorting some of the other shaders. Just looking at the image, I also felt some of the rocks in the foreground felt a little dry. So I'm going back and revisiting some of those shaders and making them feel a little bit wet. Next, we're bouncing back over to Nuke. And one of the big changes here was really I wanted to work on the sky a little bit more. I needed to readjust some of the fog. I felt like this image currently is a little bit too, feels like the towers are a little bit too grayed out from the fog. So you'll see me doing some color correction on that. And another thing I did was when I went in and placed the bridge wider, I changed the model, and rather than having the frogs on the other end, I wanted to see what it would look like to have 6 pillars of fire. That was another way I was trying to show the depth and give the sense that we were actually going back in space. And in the end, I actually decided to go back and bring the frogs back. I wasn't really happy with it. But you can kind of see what the process is starting to become. It's a whole lot of going into 3D, doing a small tweak, seeing how something looks, and then doing your render and bringing it back into Nuke. And in full-on production, this is a very similar way of working, where you do these major iterations on your renders and make some notes for yourself and figure out where you want to take the image next, or maybe your directors will tell you where they want to see the image go, or, shot, whatever it may be. And it's a lot of this kind of back and forth from compositing to lighting, at least for me, when I'm really trying to figure out things like composition and light intensities and all of that. So you'll notice at this stage, it's a lot of really finessing and fine tuning. I'm not doing any major changes to my lighting because that will in turn go and really mess up some of the color correction that I was doing. It's much more going in and seeing if there's little details I can add to make things better. There's an old expression that the final 10% or 5% is the hardest part of any piece of art. And it's really going in and trying to strive for that perfection is a major challenge. So, I went back and forth on these flames quite a bit. And at this point, this was kind of when I realized I didn't actually even want them. It was feeling pretty busy. You can see I tried making the flames and the torches in the foreground a little smaller. And then the ones around the temple would be even bigger. And I just really felt like it was, especially from far away like that, it was feeling kind of hard to look at. So this roto shape is actually where I went in and I was experimenting with having some of the fog held out in that area. And so you can see right there what I actually ended up doing was grabbing a grade node and connecting my roto shape to it. And I'm really just trying to, again, it's all about really subtle changes right now, just fine tuning that color in that main area around the temple and making sure that it had enough contrast maintained, and that I really could get in there and just get it to pop a little bit more. Another thing I noticed when I moved that rope and the other pieces of the bridge around was that the shader for the rope never got assigned. You can see that the shader, or that the rope, is all gray when it gets zoomed in there. So that was another thing I had to go in and figure out. So at this point here, again, it's all about these little tiny tweaks. So I'm going in and I really wanted to pull out the highlights in the sky and just really show the direction of the sun, where in the sky that sun is setting. And I felt like the camera is currently being exposed for all of these flames and everything. So the brightness in the sky as it leaks through those clouds would be fairly bright. The other thing I wanted to do is get a little bit more color in there. So this is me going in and actually creating a ramp and trying to just get a little bit of control over that. So I wanted to grab the same blue-green color that's from the photograph and combine that with a little bit of the reddish color from the sun, from the sunset right there. So I created that gradient, and then I actually just straight up overlaid that on the image. And, going in and doing that overlay multiplies some of the darks and adds the lights. So my green value is just barely under that 50%. You can see if I really crank the mix all the way up, it really darkens down and saturates that side of the image. And then the brights are actually going in and lifting the left side by the sun. And you can see right at the end here, I actually did end up removing those flames. And now I'm actually going to bounce back over to 3D and bring the frogs back in. The last little tweaks that are happening, I am going in and adjusting the intensity of the flames around the temple. And I actually brightened the intensity of the torch a tiny bit, and I increased the spill of the light using the V-Ray light selects. And, I really loved the light selects when I comped this. I was really able to get a lot of control over the intensity of the lights and a finesse that I was not able to achieve in 3D. And so the last little tweaks in this area, I was really going in and just kind of dialing the specular, because I lifted the intensity of the light and I wanted to lift up the specular as well. So now let's bounce back over 3D. It's always exciting when you get to this stage because you're really starting to get close. This was feeling like maybe the last little chunk of 3D work that I would need to do. So it's assigning those missing shaders, getting the frogs back in there, and figuring out what the, final-ish look is going to be. But I had to track down the shaders first. And then once I, finished with all of this, I wanted to bring the frogs back in and then do a couple test renders to make sure everything was working. So there you can see the ropes. I've got my kind of procedural metal shader, procedural rope shader, and then the sculpted gold piece as well. And the shaders are looking pretty good. So this is another little area that was just kind of bothering me in that image, and it felt a little bit messy. The way the rock was penetrating through that step was creating a kind of funny line. And so I wanted to just take one last stab at this area because, like I said before, this was really an area of the image that was really just kind of driving me crazy. And so I actually ended up doing some modeling, a little slight model tweak there just to really try and get this step looking good. And then in doing so, when I was zoomed in on this area, I really also kind of noticed that the way the bridge was connecting was kind of funky. And again, I was admittedly being fairly lazy right here because this was an area of the image that was very far away. So I didn't really think it out. I just kind of, based on the angle and all of that, it wasn't a big deal to me. In full-on production for video and other, film and even games and that kind of thing, if this was an area of the environment that I would have seen up close, I would have definitely gone in and spent a lot more time with that to make it work a little bit better. But overall, it should hold up from the distance the camera is going to be at. And then now it's time to do, hopefully, what will be our final batch render.